Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try and address two general subject areas if time permits. The first of these is some observations about how this budget and the general direction this government has taken over the 10 years it's been in power have caused us to drift away from the goal of Canada being an egalitarian society, financially egalitarian, in which all people have a fair shot at doing well, and those who are less well off are taken care of through our welfare state. And the second part, I will talk specifically about issues relating to the cost of housing, especially as it affects younger people, which obviously is one of the key areas in which issues of affordability and equity are problematic. The stated goal, Mr. Speaker, of Canada's welfare state has always been to redistribute wealth from wealthier Canadians to Canadians who have less. From its very start in the 1920s and 1930s, the goal of wealth redistribution from rich to poor has been supported by a broad national consensus and all parties. Over the years, Canadians have sometimes complained that taxes were too high or that too much of the redistributed wealth was being used up in bureaucratic churn. But no major political actor has ever suggested a return to the old days when tax rates were very low and the poor received no public assistance whatsoever. But recent public policy shifts, the last 10 years, and particularly this budget, have caused the welfare state to drift away from this widely supported redistribution from rich to poor and towards something entirely different. Increasingly, the policy choices of Canadian governments, and to some degree this is governments at all levels, but particularly of this government, have had the practical impact of transferring wealth not to the poorest, but rather to parts of the population that are already well off. I could give a very long list from both federal and provincial policy, municipal policy as well, quite frankly. But let me just give one example that is held up by the Liberal government as being a touchstone of how much they want to help those in need, and that is their publicly funded child care program, introduced last year, which promises to offer significantly more affordable child care to everyone in principle. But in practice, the program is available for the most part only to people who live in larger population centres that are closer to where the regulated daycare spaces are located. This creates the following problem. State-subsidized childcare spaces are available to urbanites who are on average wealthier, but not to rural Canadians who are on average less wealthy. Similarly, subsidized childcare is unavailable for children of shift workers who are almost always less wealthy. And so on the whole, this is a transfer that misses those who need it the most and provides it to those who need it the least. That is not to say that it's not an important policy goal. It is to say that this is a very poor mechanism by which to help those who are parents and who are not wealthy. Likewise, the programs to give incentives to individuals to purchase zero-emission vehicles are great for those who are in a position to purchase a vehicle at all, who are in a position, because they are urbanites, to be close to where they can recharge their vehicle with ease before the battery runs out. It is of no use at all to someone in a rural area. It's of no use at all to someone who's less well off. But it transfers taxes that were collected from everybody to a certain segment of the population, and in practice to those who don't need it rather than those who need it the most. Now let me turn to the issue of housing. Everybody knows the cost of housing has soared over the past few years. But it seems to me that something should be said to the generally well-off people in this room. Those of us who are wealthier, those of us who are older, someone who's a boomer or a Gen Xer like myself, if that person bought a house a decade ago, or 2 decades ago, or 3 decades ago, the price of housing can be looked at dispassionately. In fact, it's a question that, on the whole, has made us better off. Prices are high, and that's tough for some other people. But for us homeowners, things are actually pretty good. That house that each one of us bought, which seemed expensive at the time, is now worth twice as much or more. And that's when you take into account inflation. If you just look at the nominal price, the growth is even greater. For many people of my generation, the resale value of that mortgage-paid house is the foundation for what promises to be a very comfortable retirement. But if you don't own a house, like most young people, things look and feel entirely different. When I was 25, back in 1990, it was possible for me to rent, a small, fully detached 3-bedroom house in a pleasant neighborhood in Ottawa for $850 a month, which is $1,840 in 2025 dollars. Now, recently, out of curiosity, I took a look online to see how much it would cost to do this now. A comparable home in a comparable location would be about 50% more than it was then in terms of rent. As a result, for 49% of Canadians under the age of 25, just paying the cost of rent consumes half their income, according to a survey conducted earlier this year. Now, you can just shrug that and say, well, look, maybe it's a bit much for a 25-year-old to expect to live in a 3-bedroom house, although nobody thought that in 1990 when I was 25. But the fact that most people this age are living in shared rooms or in apartments far smaller than what I once enjoyed, and the survey shows the average rent for people in this age range is about $1,400, and that they're living in very small spaces. It's not just the very young who have this problem. 34% of renters of all ages are paying more than half their incomes in rent. And it's not just a problem in the big cities. A substantial percentage of Lanark County residents, I represent Lanark County, also pay more for rent than for all other expenditures combined. Given these facts, it seems hard to deny that in order for most young people to become financially secure, they have to escape the high cost of renting, which means buying a home. But to state the obvious, it's nearly impossible for them to save up for a down payment for a house whose price, of course, has skyrocketed when the high cost of rent is soaking up so much of their income. This leads inevitably to some depressing news. StatsCan reports that after 10 years of Liberal government, the percentage of people under the age of 30 who own their own home has fallen by a third. Now, the statistics are for 2011 and 2021. Nothing more recent is available, but it makes the point that by now, home ownership numbers among the young are falling and appear to be falling with increasing speed. And this produces an even more alarming statistic. While the average income in Canada for people in the bottom half of age earners has gone up by 250% since 1982, mostly due to inflation, the cost of housing of all sorts is up more than 3 times as much. Housing prices are rising far faster than wages. And that means, Mr. Speaker, that there is now a divide. It's generational in nature. It is divided between urban and rural. It's divided in a way where we see the dream of social equity disappearing, the dream of prosperity disappearing for a substantial part of the population. And I think that may be why, in the last election, poll-by-poll results are available, so you can go back and look, and you can see that very clearly in my own riding, was those who were the least well-off who were voting for the Conservative Party and against the government. And that appears to be a pattern that was true across the country. Those who were most well-off, who enjoy home ownership, who enjoy high-paid wages, who enjoy the benefits of a system that transfers essentially to the wealthy, they voted Liberal. I think we have to step back and think, what can we do as a country to make sure that that divide ends? The Liberals should have a partisan interest in this. They should be worrying about, for their own sake, about trying to stop the enormous and growing social divide. This is a crisis which is transforming the nature of our society. And I think if it's not dealt with, the Canada that our children will have when they're my age will be far worse, quite frankly, than the one that we inherited from our parents. That's a great shame. This budget could have dealt with this issue. Instead, more spending is being piled on, more debt is being accumulated, which will be paid for by the next generation. When the Liberals use the term generational budget, I can only think they're talking about a concept known as generational debt, which is what they're imposing on our children, who will pay more taxes into a system that transfers money away from them and structures policy to make sure they cannot move ahead. It's a great shame, Mr. Speaker. All I can do is hope that on this basis, Canadians will reject, this House will reject the Budget Implementation Act when it comes for a vote.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm just curious because the cost of rent absolutely is challenging in this country. There was some good news, but it's mixed across the country, and I think we should acknowledge that. The member mentioned that he's from Lanark County, and I'm just wondering, to what extent does he think the Conservative provincial government's elimination of rent control on units built or occupied after 2018 has had, because if you look at the charts in terms of rents, we can see that the get out of the way approach actually has driven up the cost of rents in this province.
The honourable member for Lanark Frontenac.
Thank you. That's, of course, a question about provincial policy, but I did invite it by saying that federal and provincial policies have had a combination. I suppose the answer there was the goal the provincial government had in mind was to encourage more construction for rental purposes. And their belief was, the Ford government's belief was that there's no investment case to be made for building a new rental unit if you expect that rent controls are going to have the effect of capping your income from that unit. So I think that was the purpose of doing that. Whether it's been successful or not, I don't know for sure. But there is a basic problem here with rent control, which is this. It's available for those who've been renting for a long time, who typically are older people, who in some cases, not in all cases, have more money. And it's not available at all for younger people, which means that they are paying full price for rents in a province that has rent control for some and not for others.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
The honourable member for Gaspésie, les Îles de la Madeleine, Ristigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. I have concerns for those in need in our society. He addressed the issue. I'd like to have his perspective on an issue that is really critical to us. Major reform of employment insurance to make sure that the seasonal sectors of the economy can operate and that seasonal workers can be available when we need them without being in situations of poverty or others in between work phases. What does my colleague have to say about this idea of complete reforms of the EI system? The honourable member for Lanark Frontenac. Excellent question, Mr. Speaker. This is a question I do not have expertise in. It's a problem for many people in the Magdalen Islands, perhaps the most beautiful region of our country. This is a region where fishing is a significant industry. I may not be the right person to answer that question.
Comments? The honourable member for Northumberland Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank you very much to the member for one of the best speeches, and I mean this without hyperbole, I've heard in this place. I'm wondering if the member could expand upon what he believes that a Conservative or any government could do to help the youth get out of the current quagmire that this government has put them in.
Stop spending. Stop spending more than you're bringing in. At some point, we have to return to a budget balance, and therefore, there is no way one can continue spending with deficits of this size forever. It's fiscally unsustainable. And as we do it, it's going to lead to more and more and more debt on which we have to pay interest. It's going to crowd out lending in the private sector, which will drive up interest rates for those who are paying mortgages or have other forms of indebtedness. Everybody who doesn't have debt suffers in a high interest rate environment. Everybody who is a creditor or who owns shares in a company that or has a pension fund that owns bonds, those individuals who are all wealthier do better in an higher interest rate environment. If you take a look at the Parliamentary Budget Officer's paper on the relative amount of spending power for different quintiles in the population, he points out that the result of higher interest rates has been that the wealthier in Canada are getting wealthier and the poorest are getting poorer.